Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Wherever you're listening, even if it's at 3 a.m. or midnight, welcome to the Divine Mess. Welcome to the 43rd episode. And today we have a very special guest among us, like we have been having for the past few weeks. We have been hosting like virtual couch, like to people across the world, and there are beautiful souls coming. And today we are in the presence of a divine mom. So it's the divine feminine energy coming through today. So I'm looking forward to that. And by the way, if it's your first time listening, I'm Kirti Deva Perumal, also known as Deva. I'm the cosmic guide at the Hero's Mystic, where we help you to go, like enjoy your journey on the hero's journey to slay the demons and awaken your inner hero within. And like every single week, I'm joined by my co-host from a neighboring country, yet 8 hours of flight to get to her place. And she's Tina Marie. She's the intuitive and love coach at Doma and Co. She loves to listen to the universe. That's what she's been saying.
Sometimes not super well, but I do my
She
best.
loves to surrender to the universe. She keeps saying that. She has been mentioning that all the time. And today she had the pleasure to introduce our guest. So I will leave the floor to her. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, thank you. I've been looking forward to this conversation since we had our 30-minute virtual get to know you. So we'll be very interested to dive a little bit deeper with the beautiful Elizabeth today, but I will just read a quick bio for everybody so you get a gauge at the depth and the breadth that this woman has, in her understanding of the divine feminine. So Elizabeth is the founder of Be Divine and the Hive Temple Collective. Very interesting. We're getting started. She is a priestess within the Divine Mother Church and the Temple of Isis, and is initiate of the Pythoness, an animalistic feminine tradition that originates in Western Europe. She's also a qualified hypnotherapist. She holds a BA in philosophy and an AD in theatre. She serves as a spiritual mentor and coach in bringing forward sacred feminine pathways of spiritual awakening. Her company, Be Divine Trainings and Coaching, utilises embodiment practices, ceremonial work, initiatory experiences, and the work of Byron Katie alongside psychological understanding of parts and work and the shadow. Her work integrates the spiritual and the worldly, supporting individuals in their awakening and becoming a force for good in the world. Sacred feminine pathways of spiritual awakening are about descending into the body, into our humanity, and into the shadow and into the world. It is about the direct experience with the mystery. Each person has the ability to receive wisdom and guidance from Source, for the truth of their being is that they are all divine. Elizabeth invites people into the experiential truth of their own divine nature and supports them in creating soul-centered lives in service to all. So, wow, that encompasses so much, yet is, I think, literally just scratching the surface of what you actually do with your clients, whether I'm assuming it's a one-on-one or whether it's through retreats or, working with a collective of people. So welcome. Thanks for coming and joining us on the couch this morning.
Thank you. Wonderful to be with you.
So maybe if we could sort of start from the beginning. I know, 2 seconds. Sorry, David.
Do you think I could borrow some money for lunch?
Press. Yeah, my question was to maybe give the listeners an idea of where your journey began. I know for a lot of the people that have come on the couch before, they've had midlife kick in the butts and, have not been very good at listening to the divine. But how did your journey start?
Well, really, I would say I was born into it. So my parents are spiritual seekers. They, in the 60s got into transcendental meditation and were a part of the TM movement. And both of them practitioners, and my mother became a teacher of TM. So the saying is, I was born into a family of yogis, in the sense that they were very deep on the spiritual path and the path of enlightenment and awakening. And so I feel incredibly blessed to have been born into a family that already had a really strong framework and a value for spiritual work. And then I can also relate to the moments of crisis, which we all have, as moments of initiation and getting pulled deeper. But in terms of origin, I started meditating when I was 5 years old. I was doing yoga and asanas, and I think what also really connected me spiritually was nature and a deep love of natural and wild places, which is another value that my family shares. And so learned to meditate from being quite young. And then around the time that I was maybe 10 years old, I got really into Wicca and paganism, and that was my first adventure into the goddess, and particularly nature-based spiritual practices. Then at the time when I was 16, my mother, Connie Huebner, founded a church called the Divine Mother Church, which celebrates the Divine Mother across all traditions. So it's non-denominational. And at the heart of it is a practice that teaches people how to have a relationship with Divine Mother, an interactive relationship with Divine Mother. So there's a energetic healing modality, which is part of it, but at its heart, and even the purpose for the healing itself, is to get us in contact with our divine union. And Divine Mother being the Mother God, or the principle of wholeness, the relational element to the divine, the sacred ensouled matter. And she's really rising at this time on the planet. Of course, she's always been here across all of traditions, but she's coming up very much to the forefront, I believe, to bring people into relationship to their own sense of divine incarnation, as well as the heart. And so I started training with my mother when I was 16. And then, like any good teenager, I solidly rebelled against against my mother to the best of my ability, which and there was actually a moment in receiving a healing from her when I was in my teens. And part of the wisdom that came through Divine Mother was that it was, and it's so interesting to remember it so clearly, but she said, "You are not made just for the light. You're made to experience every color in creation." And that really stuck with me, I think, because through TM and just my mother being who she authentically is, there's a lot of emphasis on the light and enlightenment and ascension. And I think that's very common in the spiritual field. But I was really curious about the dark. I mean, my favorite color when I was 5 years old was black. And I was curious about the world, and I was curious about the human experience. And there was something that felt off to me about an emphasis on, that you live your whole life and you are diligent in your practices and your meditations, and then you become enlightened, and as though that was the end all be all of our being here. And I'm like, but what about this whole life thing? Like, what about life? That seems to be maybe why we're here, being that we're born into this life. So as a teenager, I kind of almost really by conscious choice started investigating the darkness. And I always had a strong foundation. I had my mother's work, I had healing work. So I'd say that my adventures were safe compared to many. I certainly had many friends that I saw, go over the cliff, and yet I was able to remain really grounded in myself and in my center while exploring some of the wildness. And what I kind of mean by that is basically sex, drugs, and rock and roll, which I lovingly refer to as the wild feminine, the dynamic feminine that in her more distorted forms tends to come out as sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And we can double click on any one of those, because there's a sacred form and there's a profane form. So the long story short, this was the origin, and I'm giving you more of the whole story. But I'd say that my path has been very much about holding both, holding the exploration of our humanity and the wild and the dark, alongside being really deeply rooted in the divine and truth and the purity of that, which to me is more important than other more traditional ideas about purity. It's the purity of our connection to the divine that really matters.
And I know that when we spoke to you a wee while ago, you said that you were holding an upcoming a week-long session with half a dozen ladies. The women that come in to that very sacred space, does it take them some time to drop the mask and to embrace that wild feminine? I know, because there seems to be this thread in society that, you know, if you embrace the wild woman, you're either crazy or, you know, you aren't, you know, someone that most people want to associate with. So we homogenize ourselves or Stepford wives ourselves into a space that we completely forget the wild feminine side, but then always going, there's something more missing, but I don't know what the more is. And like, you know, I can't put my finger on why I feel so disconnected from the people that I live with, or with, you know, I don't really like my job. You know, they can't name it. Do they find there a great sense of freedom in being able to name it whilst, you know, conducting one of your weeks with you?
Yes, I think it feels like a homecoming. And so getting into the wild woman, I'll offer just a little abbreviated version of persona shadow split. And the way that I tend to work with that with women in particular is the virgin whore split, or virgin wild woman split. So Jung is the originator of this concept of the shadow, and there's been many other incredible contributors to that body of work. But essentially, our ego, or our sense of who we are, how we present to the world, and how we experience ourselves is made up of a split between persona and shadow. Persona being everything that we have been taught to be, and everything that we've been rewarded for being. So in women, traditionally, that has been the good girl. That's been the archetypally what we would call the virgin. And there's more nuance there as well, because in many ways women have received a whole kaleidoscope of conditioning around how to be, but traditionally it's been, you know, don't speak too loudly, don't dress too provocatively, either actually be more masculine, or if you're being feminine, to be in one of these more traditional roles, like the good wife. And Stepford Wives is a great example of that, of sort of like the fabricated version of what that aspect is. But you think of like the 1940s type of wife who has, you know, the dinner on the table, and she doesn't cause a scene, and she takes care of the home, and she's not too overly emotional, and is forever generous, forever loving and kind, and has a sense of purity. And of course, as we look back through purity culture, it's been a couple thousand years of women being conditioned to not be too wild, not be too sexual. We have the whole burning of the witches during the Dark Ages, in which women who were wild and who were sexual and who were medicine women were particularly targeted. So this conditioning of how to be the good girl is very strong strong. I mean, it connects to, I believe, women in particular at a survival level even. And then the shadow, so that's the persona, what we've been rewarded for being, what we've been told to be, what's safe to be. And then the shadow is what we've been told is shameful, wrong, or dangerous. The thing is there's as within, so without. So a spiritual truth is that all that is God, or all that is sacred. That's one of the non-dual perspectives. All that is sacred. And as we look at the creation, we can also look at ourselves. So all within us is also, you can't actually get rid of an essential aspect of yourself. So what happens is we repress the wild woman, we repress our sensuality, our sexuality, but that doesn't actually go anywhere except for into the basement. And another good analogy is like, it's also under pressure. So if you've ever tried to hold like an inflatable ball under water, it just keeps popping up and it keeps popping up. Well, the shadow is like that. So the wild woman will keep popping up, and in ways that tend to not be really helpful to our lives. So it could come out as being passive aggressive, because we're taught to suppress our anger and our rage. So that doesn't become balanced in our system. So we then act out with passive aggressive. It could be excessive substance use or excessive sexual use, but it's these unbalanced forms of the shadow because it's unintegrated, it's unacknowledged. We crave wholeness, and when we cut off a part of ourselves, that's literally what it feels like we become anemic. There's this sense of lack of authenticity, there's this sense of lack of fulfillment, of not knowing, not feeling who we really are. And so the integration with the shadow, and I'll also say that shadow is different depending on the woman. There's some women that are more comfortable with the wild woman archetype and are really uncomfortable with, the good housewife or the virgin archetype. So just acknowledging that there's a lot of nuance in how this can show up, but overarchingly, we'll say that the wild woman is the more suppressed version. So there can be a lot of fear, and worry as to how she's going to come out. You actually have to confront what your stories of shame are about her and how you've been told to be. And so that can be a lot around the body, how we've been told to present physically. That can be around our anger. It's most often I find that the wild woman holds our sexuality and our anger. And both of those things have a healthy expression that need to be reintegrated. And when we do, contrary to what we might think, like it's not girls gone wild, it's your soul returning to you, it's your power returning to you. And so often that can come with deep catharsis and the grief of what it's been to be without that, but it also comes with so much joy and ecstasy. And we're speaking at an interesting time because I actually had 3 courses end this week, which wasn't my intention, but I had 3 big pieces, a 6-month program that is specifically on the Virgin and Horse split for the Sacred Feminine. And then I had my retreat that ended, and then another program, Oracle. So it's beautiful because I'm getting to reflect on that work. And in our closing session for Imminent Rapture, which is this course on the Sacred Feminine, part of what they were reflecting is I had a couple women who are like leaving their jobs after doing this coursework. And the reason is that when you begin to tap into what is authentically true for you, you start it's like anything in your life that is not in alignment with your authenticity starts to feel like sandpaper. And so you end up making these, and you can't deny it anymore. And it actually becomes more painful to live with it than it does to finally take the leap and say, you know what, this isn't for me. So that is part of the medicine of whatever it is that is in the shadow, whether it's the wild woman or another facet, but that's the medicine of bringing that home to yourself. It's liberation.
And do you think that this is a journey that is best for women to do collectively, or do you think you can do it as effectively on your own rather than being guided? Or is it, for me, I would feel that it would be better to be guided through that journey with someone that has a depth and a breadth of knowledge, rather than trying to kind of lift the lid of Pandora's box and dive in there by yourself, because I would think it would kind of be like having an ayahuasca ceremony and doing it all by yourself. You know, it's just that if you're not being guided in what is a healthy persona to take on versus, like you say, Girls Gone Wild, you don't know how to integrate that successfully or reintegrate it successfully back into your life. You know, have there been women that have come to you who have endeavored to attempt it themselves and have found it to be a bit messy?
Yeah, I think honestly, I think by the time they come to me, because I'm a little over the limit for a lot of people. I'm already like pretty far away from the standard norm. So I feel like by the time that they get to me, they've usually done some amount of excavation. And that may be that they've had a disruption that woke them up to something. Or it may be that they're just curious and they've started, working with a therapist, or they've started, they've done personality assessments or something like that. So there's usually something. I'd say, it's all good. It's all good. So you can start by yourself. And there's Clarissa Pinkola Estes, Women Who Run with Wolves is such a classic. And she's a Jungian, and this like reimagining of, what are the feminine mythos. And so like there's books that can begin to ignite that. I feel like The Artist's Way feels like another book that like you can take yourself through that, and that'll start to like loosen the bolts and open you up to there being something else. I think there's always value in having a guide, because a guide who has been there before has more of a map. And there's when you get, I know this for myself and my own experience in seeking out support, it's when you can be held, then you can trust that in your safety that you can actually go further to your edges. And there's great value in that. And particularly if something is feeling really repressed, or if there's a history of trauma or something like that, then I think that having a guide is of great value. And I'd say like, and don't wait for that. Like, start now. Start the adventure. Like your whole life awaits. So don't let anything become the excuse for why you can't begin. Start now. And then the other thing is like, so there's like doing it by yourself, there's doing it with a guide, and then doing it with a group is incredible. And being able to be in person and feel each other in a space, I think there's something that is very ancient that speaks to us, for men and women, and men's circles and women's circles, and or non-binary, whatever circle attends to your needs is incredibly supportive for our sense of being held and us discovering who we are, because that's in our DNA, is that healing was actually done communally. I love therapeutic work, and it's actually a more modern way of entering into healing to have it be this one-on-one relationship. Whereas historically and in indigenous cultures, and even still today around the world, it was actually very communally oriented. So it's beautiful to have. I'm a fan of all three. Do it yourself, get yourself a guide, and find a women's circle.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So many women that I do speak to, they're seeking that community or a space in which they can not completely let go, but there's some element where they can share things with people that they don't know particularly well, because it seems safer than sharing it with women that they know intimately, because there's a level of, they know me on this facet of, that I'm prepared to show, but they don't know the rest, or I'm not prepared to show the rest. Whereas when it's with someone else, I think it's easier to let your guard down and to show these other facets of yours, or explore them. I think is probably a better way of looking at it, is that giving yourself the space and the time to explore what those other facets look like, and how they can be integrated into the life that you lead. But I understand what it's like to try and continue down a path that feels like you're rubbing up against sandpaper all the time. And when you let that stuff go, people don't understand. It seems so sudden, but for, the person that's been journeying that path, it's been a long, worn, treaded path before they finally kind of take the coat off and go, yeah, see ya, I'm done. I can't do this part anymore.
Absolutely. And those longer lasting relationships, part of their function is to hold us in homeostasis. And there's a goodness in that it becomes a steady thread of who we are. But so when it comes to change and the development of ourselves, it's really, really helpful to actually go into circles where you are not known for who you were, and you get to have this freedom then of who you want to be or who you're becoming, and to get some good practice, like to let that group become a new homeostasis, and then that work of knitting that you that you are becoming, or the deeper authentic you, back into those relationships can be bumpy. I mean, it can be bumpy, and deserves to be held with grace and care and tenderness. And I think there are ways through when we tend to that, because there is a way when we learn. And this is part of why I feel like integrating psychological work with spiritual work is so valuable, because you can learn things like communication tactics with people. You can learn things like how to practice holding boundaries and speaking your boundaries, and you then have greater insight into who they are and why they are, which actually allows you to meet them in a different way. And I think there can be a lot of fear around losing the relationship, whether it's the marriage or family or friends, that if I change, I might lose these relationships. And there is validity to that concern. That can happen. And when we start showing up differently, that alone can start to shift the dynamic that we're in, because it's like, oh, actually, like, I'm just not going to pick up this, codependency thread anymore. And while that might be disorienting at first, it also offers an opportunity of relating differently, which can create opening and growth within the relationship that wasn't there before, when we were showing up in our old way and our own pattern. So I've also seen people come back into their relationships, and the relationships completely shift and bloom and heal, because just that one person was willing to do their work.
And with your mother's church, when she obviously started that, is that something that is solely based in the United States, or is it now based worldwide because it's had some time to obviously grow and develop and be something bigger than obviously her original kernel of an idea? So where are you based now?
Her church, her physical church is in Fairfield, Iowa, and that's the only physical representation of it. However, you know, they broadcast services, they do Sunday services, and a few times a week there are healings that are group healings that are offered. And I know that, you know, I mean, she's flown to France and she's offered trainings in France, and it feels like it's starting to, it definitely has begun to expand out. I think mostly that's been happening through the group work, and through individual work. And so that's where we've reached more of a global audience. And I think we're both still holding the dream that there could be Divine Mother temples. Well, and there are in certain countries already, but that, you know, that return of the Divine Mother in a temple space is something that could be reinvigorated throughout the world.
It's exciting. And it's exciting time, I think, too, for women to be able, you know, to discover their wholeness of who they're meant to be, rather than being this stereotypical, or that you know, there's only one way to be as a woman, you know, having that ability to explore. And I think also for men too, you know, men kind of have this, you know, certain boundaries and parameters that they're meant to, or feel that they're meant to operate in, but to be able to embrace all aspects of themselves, I think is very, you know, it seems very new that, you know, you can embrace the wildness and, you know, the staid and normal, and the two can live quite harmoniously together. It's almost like the balance of the masculine and the feminine in most people is like, you know, how do you balance that strategy and moving that along with the flow? You know, how does that work in everybody's life is an interesting balance for all of us to try and work out.
Absolutely. Yeah. The journey of healing through becoming whole is definitely a path for all of us. And there's a deep need on the planet at this time for us to heed that call, that all parts of us could be welcome and holy, and for men as well as women to heed that. I mean, particularly in, you know, the last decade, I think that men have been taking a lot of punches, and masculinity has been taking a lot of punches. And while there's absolutely a thread in which that, you know, there's been an imbalance in terms of values, and there's been sort of a false, what I would say, a false identification of the masculine with juvenile masculinity, that it's like it's immature masculinity that has been sort of championed as opposed to mature masculinity, which would be integrated, which would be, you know, heart, head, and gut, the ability to be deeply rooted and loving in your heart, but also the ability to be a protector, and to be able to call upon that heat and that power when you need to. I think the wildness in general, and this is where like we go beyond the body that it's coming through, but the wildness itself, I would say, is Shakti, is the sacred feminine, the dynamic feminine force. And overall on this planet, there has been a fear of the wild and a deep control of her. And that happens through all bodies. And we demonize the wild, and we have over cultivated and over colonized wild places, as well as our own bodies, as well as our own psyches. And so the return of the sacred feminine to me is about, oh, hello, fireworks. I have no idea how I did that. That was amazing.
It's a new thing on Zoom. When you say celebrating, I think it goes like this. And it's the divine
Wow.
feminine celebrating, so go for it.
That was incredible. Oh. So the return of the sacred feminine is that I was going to say the reclamation or reclaiming, but reclaiming is such a word. Feels like of the old way, but there's a returning to value, a remembering of the value of that principle. And I think we're facing that reality as we face climate change and we start to face like the very real consequences of pollution and how we're treating the wild and the planet. And we're also facing it in how in our bodies and in our psyche. And there's a balance there as well. I think that's there's a nuance that is sometimes missed, because there can also be like an over glamorizing of the wild that leaves out the fact that she's really dangerous. Like, she's really dangerous. There's a reason why our ancestors, moved into cultivation and ways of protection and holding. So what is the right way that we get to be in relationship and become good stewards of the wildness around us and our own wildness, where we have access to it and can also hold it with responsibility. Yeah.
So are there key aspects if someone is looking to find a mentor or a guide in opening the lid, so to speak, that, because there are so many people out there that say they can do certain things and really don't have the right tools to be able to guide people through this journey. What should we, as normal everyday humans who kind of go, oh, I think I might want to start that, what do we need to be looking out for in order to go, obviously apart from it, our own inner voice, but are there certain things that, or aspects that people should have in being able to tick essentially kind of tick a box for us to go, I feel comfortable in allowing this person to help me unleash and, find this wild sacredness within myself?
Yeah, that's a good question. And in some ways it's difficult to answer, because I think the way that I approach it is primarily based off of my feeling and the feeling that I'm getting from the person. But I know what's really important to me is integrity. Are they embodying the practices and the spiritual philosophies that they speak about? And sometimes that does take taking a class from them to feel that out. It's people have gotten so good at marketing and they've gotten so good at the social media game that it can be very difficult to know for sure until you get into a room with them. And so if there's video content or free content or an easy entry class that you can step into and get a sense for how they're holding it. I really value people that hold clean boundaries within a space. And so that can be even little things like starting things on time. Are they communicating well with you? Are they following through on what their commitments are? Do they have conversations around safety? I think it's great to look at credentials, and also credentials aren't everything. So just knowing that that can be one way of like, oh yeah, okay, this person has done internal family systems therapy and somatic therapy, or so they have a strong background in that. And so that can add a check to the box of trustworthiness. And I've also seen people that have a lot of boxes checked that end up just not being strong facilitators. So there is going to be some trial and error. And what I would suggest is to like treat it like a game and be exploratory and get in the water and see what works for you and what you're drawn to. I'm just checking. I'm like, is there anything, any red flags? I'm also a huge proponent of empowering the self-authority of the individual. So that can be another thing with boundaries, but that can also be in languaging. So like being cautious of somebody who places themselves as the only authority. You know, teachers and mentors are great because they are going to be ideally further along the road than you are, but to empower and respect the individual as well that is coming in and their connection to spirit, their connection to source and the divine is something that I really look for in teachers. Are they empowering of the individual? And yeah, I think that that's where what I would say. I wish it was more crystal clear,
Oh
but
no, it's just sometimes it's just that one thing that people go, okay, well, you know, if they've had some training in this, or you know, like they say, like you say, they're very clear on, we start here, we finish here. This, you know, if you don't do these things, then I'm not going to mother you through this experience. You have to radically lead yourself through this experience. I'll be there to hold your hand, but I'm not going to force you or drag you to do
yeah,
what is required in order to come out the other side.
mhm,
I think those things are equally as important, but you know, for some people stepping into this, it's quite nerve-wracking, and you're in, you know, it's a personal investment for
yeah,
yourself, and no one ever wants to feel like that they're investing in this journey and feeling like someone's taking them for a ride, you know, because there are a lot of people out there who, like you say, who purport to be something that they're not.
mhm,
And some people who are starting the journey are not as good at tapping
mm,
into their own internal wisdom and trusting it.
sure,
So they are looking for the boxes to be checked to feel that,
mhm,
you know, their investment is safe, so to speak.
mhm,
So, you know, it's an interesting journey, but like you say, try out a free class, watch their
mhm.
videos, watch a bit of their content and see what feeling you get from it. Do you walk away feeling energized from it, or do you walk away feeling drained and feeling less than when you
Mm,
started? Is
yeah.
probably a good way of looking at it. You've
And
been very
really,
quiet down there, Mr. D. Have you got any great questions for Elizabeth? You've just been cruising on the couch today.
Just absorbing the divine feminine energy, you know, like because I find like I resonate with your story as well in terms of being rebellious, you know, like as a teenager, and like my parents as well were spiritual seekers, they still are. And so I love how you resonate with the psyche, and you know, like you connect with the spiritual world. For me, like it's going back to you, like how do you stand in your Shakti? You know, like how did you accept that I'm Shakti,
mm,
you know?
mm. I feel like that's an ongoing journey. I think I've always been a woman. I've always had a lot of life force, and and part of my journey has been learning proper containment for it. Actually, I think particularly, in my adventure into my wild years. That energy was so wild and free in me and felt so good, but I didn't know how to hold it responsibly. And so because of that, you go into the underworld and you don't come out unscathed. So that was an initiation. And there were experiences that were quite painful in that. And in some way, I've gone through my own journey of being burned by the wild woman. As somebody who is always oriented to actually being more like her, like I've been more comfortable with her as an essence in me. I've had to reintegrate the virgin and my masculine because the dynamism of the feminine, like nature, there's she can be dangerous. And I don't mean to say that in such a way to frighten people, because especially for people that are more restrained, um you're gonna be okay. It's more the women that are like, oh yeah, I got the wild woman and I've gone way over the rails, and particularly that can happen in younger girls throughout the teenage years, throughout the 20s, of like, it's like you have so much heat, and we don't have a culture that teaches us how to hold that responsibly. And so it can very easily go into substances and sexuality, and in a way that can cause harm. So how have I come to know that I am her and hold her? I think I've been blessed in that there's been a deep knowing of her all along. I particularly find her when I dance, and that would actually be my suggestion of like where for people to begin by dancing. And wherever the road is for dance for you, whether it's like turning on one song and dancing in your house, or if it's going to an ecstatic 5 rhythms class, or if it's partner dancing, like there's a lot of different avenues in. But for me, I've always found her in dance, because dance is how it's our oldest form of worship. And it is the celebration and the embodiment of life. So for me, that's where I've always found her. And it's also such a beautiful metaphor, because like if you get too wild in the dance, you can hurt yourself. And it's not like dancing is bad. It's like, oh yeah, I wasn't mindful of my feet, or I wasn't, grounded in my pelvis, and so I lost my balance. Or so you have to have the masculine structures to hold yourself. And ultimately it's that being able to hold yourself with integrity that gives you more freedom. So the more that I have been able to integrate my own sense of groundedness and clarity and rootedness, the more I've been able to allow her to vibrate in my system. And it's such a good question. So I'm like, I keep, as I'm speaking, I know I'm like repeating it to myself. I'm like, how do I know? I feel like I could do a whole meditation on that, reflection on like, how do we know? How do we know? But I'd say it's in the dance. Um, I'd say I've experienced her and myself as her in plant medicine. Um, and Yeah, it's through these embodied practices that what comes through is this deep knowing of um, of the divine within the body, rather than it being something that is outside of the body, which in traditional, so much of prevalent traditional religions, that's what we've been taught, is that God is something outside of the body as opposed to something within us. Um, Yeah, good question. Mhm.
I know it's a deep question because you embody that, and last time we spoke, like you did show us like one form of Shakti, you know, like, and it's one of my favorite. It was Kalima, and that's a very powerful that people fear her though, you know, like, and for me, like, she may be a representation of the wild women that you speak about, but or maybe like that anger as well that we suppress within, but actually there's that divine love within Kali
Mhm.
that's so powerful that if people understand that, you know, like, and that's what Shakti is about, right? It's just a form of Shakti, and I feel like people, women that I work with, especially moms, that's why I wanted to know from your perspective, like based on your experience, how did you come to term that I am Shakti? Because I feel that mom sometimes they don't accept their power, you know, like in terms of their Shakti, of that divine love that they can hold space for the to create a home. Because
Mhm.
from my cultural background, we were always taught like it's the women that create the home. Yes,
Mhm.
the men can hold that framework around that protection, the Shiva, you know, like Shiva protection, and but it's the Shakti that come within and that creates that home. And
Mhm.
so I was like curious, you know, like how do you speak? How can we help mom or women out there listening to really accept, to come to terms that accept your divine love within you, and it's all
Mm.
good, like you said.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I feel the devotion in that question too. And it's been we in the retreat that I just hosted, we had a 3-month-old baby with us. And that was so important to me to create these containers where mothers can be held, because so often, especially mothers of young children, are often barred from spaces. And and that just seems off. So it's like, how do we welcome them in so that they can receive when they're in this state of, literally physically giving of their bodies to another being? So yeah, how I I think mothers need support. And I know that this varies really strongly depending on the culture and the community, but I know certainly here in the West, there's a lot of isolation around mothers. And so I think that there's some just really basic stuff of of mothers not having time for themselves. And so their whole attention and being is about giving and holding these structures. So I think part of how they can come into loving relationship with themselves is by asking for support from their partners, from their family, and actually holding boundaries. And this is another dance of of the masculine principle with the feminine. And I'll tell women all the time, I'm like, your masculine has to be a protector of your own feminine. And what that can look like is saying, like, you know what, from 8 to 8:30, I am taking a bath by myself and no one gets to knock on my door. And that's it. Like, or whatever it is. And so I think we can start small and like, rather than be daunted by like, oh my goodness, like I'm a mother and I need to learn how to love myself. It's like, what is the small gift that you can give yourself? Is it taking 5 minutes to place your hands on your body and take some deep breaths into your heart and just be with yourself before you then go and make dinner for your family? Like, what are these small moments of tending to your own system? Um, my partner and I use the sacred pause a lot. And he will actually ask me, it's like when there's a conversation about doing something, would you do this for me? Or would you do this? To bring in a pause intentionally, even when I think I don't need one. But before I answer, like, I'm going to take a sacred pause and just like, let me drop into my system and see if I'm actually a yes or a no for that. Boundaries are really, yeah, for some reason what's coming forward right now is boundaries being the way that we actually love ourselves and tend to ourselves. by asking for what we need and saying no when we're a no to something. And I realize that can become complicated in family dynamics. But like, let's all get on the page of helping moms do that. And then, of course, there's more. It's like, yes, dance and take bubble baths and, gaze at yourself in the mirror just lovingly for 5 minutes. Like, there's a lot of practices of self-love, but sometimes that overcomplicates the very simple action of like, are you honoring your yes and your no? Are you listening to yourself? Like, that's the basic level. Are you honoring your yes and your no? Are you listening to yourself and what you need? So to start there and then know that, like, yeah, that there's a whole world that you can explore in terms of, pleasure practices, which are beyond sexual practices. Like pleasure practices can be like eating with consciousness. It can be massage. It can be rubbing your own feet before you go to bed. There's like so many ways to be in pleasure, which is one of the ways that we can offer love to ourselves and others. And I love that you work with mothers because they need that support.
Yes, we do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can get caught up in the busyness of humaning and helping young humans navigate the world for themselves and having honest conversations with teenagers and letting them know that they've stepped over boundaries can be tricky, because all we want is to be of service to our children, but in order to do that we need to be of service to ourselves first.
Yeah.
Which is so very important. But we have been so honored and so blessed to have you here with us today, and I know we've just barely scratched the surface in the things that you offer and the knowledge and the wisdom that you have within yourself that is there to be accessed by so many beautiful humans around the world. So thank you so much for taking the time and sitting down with us and having a conversation today. Now, my gorgeous friend, do you have anything else to?
Oh, it was just a beautiful sharing, like sharing that divine feminine energy and also balancing it with the mention of masculine and your perspective on the masculine energy as well. And I loved your psych references because I come from a psychology background. So I was like, yeah, there you go. I love it. Keep going. So I was like understanding that from the psychological perspective. But thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your Shakti with us today. I feel that was a beautiful sharing of energy, and I know there's more. So if you have some, like wisdom to share with our audience before we end this episode, and also if you have any upcoming events that people can connect worldwide, or they can come to the US, please go for it.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's so wonderful to be in conversation with the two of you. So thank you both for your time and your offerings. Let's see, in terms of as an opening into working with the Divine Mother, just hold in your awareness that she's very near. She's right here, and she's always right here. And so to seek her in your own breath and seek her in your own presence and seek her through the flowers that are waving at you and the sun that is shining down on you. And just that little noticing starts to open up your relationship with her. And so that's what I would leave your audience with as a place to begin. And for anybody who would like to adventure further down the rabbit hole, this is very much what I teach. My website is be like the honeybee divine.life, be divine.life. And I actually have a course coming up right now called Oracle of Divine Mother, which teaches people this healing modality as well as how to receive direct wisdom from Divine Mother. And if depending on where you are in the world, so far we've been able to get people from, Kenya, and, so we've gotten a few people from around the world based off of time zone. So you would need to check that. But it's really beautiful, deep work. And both my mother and I, we've taught it together, we've taught it separately. And we've never had someone who wasn't capable of learning how to receive wisdom, because it's ultimately about dropping into the truth of who we are. And so we all hold that innate ability. So I have Oracle coming up, and you can check out my website. I've always got something that's coming out.
Well, thank you for sharing that. If you got people from Kenya, so I'm sure we can get people from Mauritius, from where I'm born from. So it's nearby for us. So I'm sure we can get people from there. And people who are listening, please connect with Elizabeth. We have her website in the show notes. So if you can't connect with her for whatever reason, please let us know. We will make sure that you can connect with this beautiful energy. So on that note, thank you so much. We will be looking forward to our next guests coming on board, and also our learning. So thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you.